Hello everyone and welcome to Rocket Lasso Live. It is Wednesday, it is episode 23. I am Chris Schmidt and we're going to be answering questions about Cinema 4D, both from a live Twitch chat and from a live YouTube chat, so I never quite know what's going to be coming. A couple of quick notes today while I'm thinking about it. I just launched a new tutorial. Actually, yesterday they were doing work out in the alley and I had no electricity, so I couldn't do my bonus stream yesterday, unfortunately, and I couldn't post my tutorial, my weekly tutorial, so it all went out today. I'm really excited about the one that came out today. Let's mute this. The tutorial is, I think it's a really fun technique. There's a lot of really neat details that people can make it their own, and there's just so much variation and uniqueness that people could build in. It's actually a two-parter. One is pretty short, for me, only about 30 minutes of information to do the core stuff. And then another video that is just exploring more techniques, but you know, it's not the core information. And then let's see if this works. I put together a little animation. Let me make sure that audio is on. I just posted this on Instagram, so. That's the new tutorial that is currently live. In fact, here's a link to it directly. You should go check it out if you want to see it. And make sure you @ me on any social media platforms if you make something cool from it. But I just want to make sure to share that because I think it's a good one. We've already got lots of questions coming in from everybody. Before I forget, make sure you subscribe to the second Rocket Lasso channel. There is a second YouTube channel called Rocket Lasso Live where I'm posting all of the replays of these videos. The main channel is just for the weekly tutorials now and the more official things. So that should cover that. We've got questions coming in all over the place. There's a lot of links coming in on Twitch, so I'm going to grab one from there. Let's see. Is there any names that I don't click too often? Does this link work? Oh yeah, that's the broken link, so I can't click that one. Maybe a fixed one comes in. This guy makes crazy shapes and loops in cinema. Uh-oh, I might know what it is. We'll find out. Nope, not what I was thinking. Let's see what we've got here. Firstly, this is from Yuan Visuals. Yuan, maybe Yuan. Okay, there's audio. I gotta mute that, otherwise YouTube can get angry. Whoa, that's really crazy. Let's see. What are they calling out? Well, they don't put any like tags or anything for what it might have done, so we just have to look at it and figure out what we're seeing here. Pretty cool. The crazy colors traveling along is an important detail on this one as well. Interesting. I've got some basic ideas. I'm trying to think it through a little bit more. The colorizing of them, I don't have any theory on. And honestly, even when it comes to the spline, there's some plugins, and we don't want to use any plugins for this if we don't have to, that can do sort of spline slicing based on levels. That's surprisingly possibly tricky. These are all static. They're not animating independently. And then you get there's some of these shapes that seem to, you see there's like a empty middle void. There's a lot of cool things about this one, so I don't mind spending a little bit of time tackling it. Everybody's talking about most spline turtles lately. I have not, I'm going to have to tinker with them. I just don't have any intuition for the way they work. I have the idea of sort of how they work, but I don't know if that kind of thing would would really work. I always thought it was more like branching in trees, not specifically curvy things. Now, I mean, I'm trying to think of a way of doing it not dynamically, because dynamics can give us a lot of trouble with this type of setup, to tell you the truth. Some spline dynamics. At the same time, we could sweep a more complicated shape, and that could be a straightforward way of doing it. And then we could do, I don't think it's how that one was done. Like, one thought would be we could do a slice of some sort of displaced landscape. The most, I'm not sure about this. There's a lot of different directions we can go. I'm going to highly subdivide a plane just as a quick example. I'm not sure if we'll stay on this one. I've been becoming a fan of displacing things with the plane effector, turning into a point-based deformation, and then inside the fall off, this will push out on, currently on Y. I want it to be on Z. I should also make it a child so we can see it. So it's going to push up, whatever, 200 units. Inside fall off, I can feed a random field, and it just makes everything a little bit more parametric, and these calculate technically a little cleaner. And you can see it's really easy to interactively do this without like traveling inside of a noise. So if we were to make some sort of landscape shape, say like this, the scale is kind of relative. If we make it smaller, it might be a good idea. And it's pretty simple to overlay this on top of some secondary shape. I could make a box shape, T for scale, approximately large enough to capture the edges, give it a full box field, remapping inner offset. So we have a full transition there that can multiply on top of it. So now you see we get this nice fall off traveling up towards the center. So if we did that type of thing, I believe parametrically, there's no, outside of a plugin, there's no way of parametrically doing this. But I'm thinking if we put that into a connect, I'm gonna make it editable. Maybe we can go back to a lighter version if we need to. Oh wait, wasn't there a way? There might be a way. I'm gonna attempt a parametric way. I'm not sure if it will work, but well, it'll be slightly more parametric. If we put this into a fracture object, then we can, it's gonna make these separate breaks. And isn't there a way of, we can go to selections and grab the edge, surface break edges, edge vertices. Might have to be this one. I'm not certain. So it exposes that as a parameter. It's gonna be hard to tell exactly. So I'll just make this editable. And I just want to, okay, that is the one that creates the outline, which is good. Now I can undo. This is currently being fed these random chunks because the source is a random point distribution. Instead, we feed it something linear, very clean, say a matrix object set to linear. This will travel upward, make as many of these as we want. If we feed the matrix in as the source, it's going to start doing horizontal slices, because at any given point, that slice is the closest to one of these given matrices. Yeah, I'm glad I remembered this. So we can increase the count, decrease how far apart they are from each other. Let's say about 10. So now you can see we're actually getting something parametric-esque doing a series of slices. And the hope would be, can we return it as a single? I don't think we can tell it to return as a single object, but perhaps if I feed this, I'm going to create a connect without making an automatic parent, because first I want to turn off weld. There are a lot of points. Feed that in here. If I make that editable, I think all of those different sections will be welded down. If I double click, you can now see I get the edges. Actually, welding it might be a good idea now that I think about it, because if we don't weld it, there'll be double points in that section. So if I make it editable, let's see if that selection is still good, and it is. So we do have to make it editable right there to get this initial one, but this is now successfully giving us an edge selection. Hitting Shift C, typing in the word edge, we can find edge to spline. There is no shortcut, so that's the quickest way to do it. That will have created a spline, which I go to object mode, copy the spline, and then hit undo until this becomes parametric again. Holding down Control or Command, I can hit the checkbox and they'll all turn off. In fact, I don't think it'll hurt anything to put that in the hierarchy as well. So now it exists, but we don't need it to be in our way. Paste in the spline, and now we've got a relatively clean version of this. The point distribution is going to be a little bit wonky. No easy way around that for easy distribution of points, but I'm not terribly worried about that. And depending on what we're doing, I mean, if we're looking at that reference, we didn't push this too far, but if we're looking at the reference, I think if we, I'm going to paste a second copy of it in, turn one off. On one of them, I'm going to zero it out. So it's 0 height, and we'll even zero it on Y. So it's completely flat. And we get this kind of fun, flat topographical look. Maybe more slices would have been justified, but it's very clean. And then if we were to take an extrude and extrude this upward, hit NA, so we're just seeing the final geometry. It's very cool looking. Turning on an SSAO, so there's a little bit of depth in it. See it a little more clearly. If we drive this, if we displace the connect spline, which actually I think we can just steal this plane. I'm going to hold down Control as I make a copy. That will deform that geometry, reactivate it. The plane seems to want to push it in some strange directions. So I'm going to make sure that it is deforming based not on the node, but the effector. I think the effector, let's say, there's some funky things we might be able to do with that. Oh, and I guess the effector might be, or it's pushing on Z now. Because we're based on the effector, we want to push this on Y. So now, because it's actually the same noise and the same placement, we can actually get the same height field back again, but it's a little bit more, I know it's kind of weird, but it's a little bit more parametric there. But now we can feed in the animation speed. And then if I hit play, these will transition around, although it is tilting over. Oh, this is currently an auto direction, and as it displaces, I guess it might be changing that. So I'm going to say just be on Y. Yeah, there we go. So those all now push upward, and we're getting this effect. And if we were to just zoom up on something like this, I think we've got a reasonable, similar idea to what we were just seeing. I wonder, I don't know if this is a good idea, but currently it's an extrude, which means we're stuck to this kind of big thickness. I could drop it down to something smaller, but you see that we're going to get this more ribbon effect. I don't know if this will work, but instead of an extrude, if I make 2 copies of the spline, one that is displaced and the other that isn't, I want to see if it's possible to feed these both into a loft and if it will transition between them. Okay, it does. I don't know if this will work because I think each one is going to get a certain, yeah. Do you see how there are 16 segments that travel around? I think every single one of the splines is going to get 16 segments. Tell it not to subdivide individually. And as I increase this, it's going to get smoother, but you're going to see that the ones that are really small have a cartoonish amount of geometry generated on them. And the ones that don't need more and more and more and more. So there's a lot of wasted geometry there. But the advantage to this is you see that lays flat on the ground. Looks really cool down there. And then we get whatever height we want to feed it. Having said that, I mean, there's always a million ways of doing everything. Here's a way of doing it just with the extrude, which was behaving better because these are more even in their distribution. So if I tell this to extrude, not very much, let's just say 10 is a fine number. I can, instead of deforming the spline, let's deform the extrude itself. So the entire extrude is pushing up and down, which visually isn't going to do anything until we add another fall off. This new fall off will be linear. It shall face on the y-axis. Shrink that way down. And if I move this to the proper spot, I think I have it backwards. Let's say y minus. Whoa, maybe I didn't have it backwards. Let me think. Oh, well, that's set to max. Let's multiply it as well. So it's sort of like a mask. And there we go. I think, or it's on, is it still on the bottom? It should be from the side. The linear field should be affecting just the top layer. Yeah, like this. Actually, what we should be able to do is just put this in between. So everything above is affected, everything below isn't. And if it's backwards, if it's not working, then we have to flip it. And I feel like it is still backwards. So y plus, there we go. So now we've got the best of both worlds. We got the proper subdivision and everything's getting pushed up with it being pretty clean overall. Hitting NA, we can see that final geometry. It might be nice if it's We can try smoothing it a little bit because we get some of these pinches because it's not evenly subdivided. Where is it? Smoothing. Put in a smoothing deformer beforehand. If I hit NB, hopefully we can see as we get rid of all of the stiffness, and as with very few iterations, you see that there might be some pinching. Actually, it doesn't seem to be doing a great job of spreading them out. Temporarily turn off the plane. So here's what we're actually looking at. And currently that plane is not deforming anything. And my hope would be that as we increase or decrease this, that these would be moving around, but they really aren't. Now, does that, that's the first, I think it's the first child in, no, it still doesn't really make a difference. I'm kind of surprised, but it could just be the nature of the way that this is laid out. I'm also a little bit surprised that this extrude is working at all. With this being the first child, I would think that it wouldn't see anything except for the initial spline, but it is working. Yeah, this point distribution is bothering me a little bit. It's just going to stop it from smoothing a lot, where I do want to put a subdivision surface on there. We don't need too much, but we're getting some of these pinches in the corners. Those edges might not be welded. We might be able to put the entire thing into a connect. It would weld the ones that are too close together. It's going to slow it down a bit, but if we put this up to a larger number, yeah, you see a lot of those really small ones are getting welded together. So it might make cleaner geometry overall, but we do have to be careful. You can push it too far. And in fact, the way some of them are getting pinched or not pinched, it's a little bit weird. That's what's throwing me off, is these extrudes, which should be a very clean extrude. You see there's actually splitting off into 2 points? I kind of don't know how that's possible. Looks like this, but as it extrudes, as it deforms it from the extrude, it's a little bit weird. Let's try deforming the aftermath of it, so that should be welded together and then get deformed. There we go. That seems to have allowed those, although why does it look like we're getting a visual double layer there? A lot of interesting little weirdnesses happening. Huh, okay, well, I moved it to be a sibling instead of a child of it, and that seems to have fixed it. This is the order of operations is being very particular, not in a good way, but this is showing a better, cleaner version of cleaning up that spline, where this connect becomes some sort of resolution to clean those up. Although if we go too far, they might start welding each other upwards. Although I thought the extrude was 10, so you wouldn't think that would happen too much. But yeah, there we go. It's like that. And then the subdivision surface could perhaps smooth the entire thing out reasonably, so everything becomes nice and smooth. So that's a lot of work to get some of the basics here, but I do think it looks cool. Now, saving it is a good idea. If you are supporting on Patreon, you can get access to these scene files for your own reverse engineering purposes. Mountain lines glow, perhaps. Let's just check I'm just checking the chat to make sure there's nothing too crazy going on, but we'll keep on going. All right, seems to be working. All right, excellent. Now, another big variable there was that we were seeing that the splines were existing as a separate thing. Let's look at the reference again quickly. Pretty neat. So yeah, very thin, and then those almost seem to have a little bit of physical form to them. Several things. You can see that they seem to light up not everywhere, so there almost seems to be a noise-based thickness on where they show up, and then each individual line, is that true actually? It's hard to tell. Not necessarily. You see this pink is transitioning into a blue. So I thought that maybe pink would be on the same line everywhere, but it just seems to be passing through a noise, which actually makes this way easier if we're trying to do identical. I don't like aiming for identical, but let's tinker a little bit and see what we can end up with. We already know this plane is doing the proper deformation on things, so I'm going to attempt to deform the spline. Now that does have the fall off. I'm going to delete the fall off, and there, that should push up the spline the proper amount. Although they seem to live in slightly different places, which isn't necessarily surprising. I can put that spline into a group and then move this above it just for the purposes of being able to scoot that spline up and down. And I think it will match if I move it up, yeah, exactly 10 units. So that's going to match the extrude. And now you see those two sections of line are matching each other. Now that that is happening, although it can become a child again, and we should do that because then hold down Alt, put into a sweep, hold down Shift as I add in an end side. This is going to become the sweep. Make it pretty thin, actually incredibly small, 0.5. We get this nice little line traveling around the entire thing. Hit NB, you can see the actual distribution of it, looking just fine. Now, the noise is animated, so this entire thing is going to be transitioning up and down identically. So we have an extrude and a sweep, both working quite nicely. We now have the ability to deform this sweep however we want to, and potentially colorize it based on a particular noise. Let's determine our noise via the thickness. And it seemed like it was pretty random. I'm immediately going to save this as a second copy. And here's the thought, the same concept again. Feed this sweep another plane. And I'm going to make it the third child, so it'll deform the result. And I want it to be treated as a deformer. It's going to explode super crazy in the parameter. I don't want it pushing out on Y. I want it pushing out on Z, but we already know it's really tiny. So I'm going to just push out by 1 unit. You see how those lines get thicker all over the place. Now, by creating a fall off, we can feed another noise value in there at whatever scale we want. And it's not the easiest thing to see, but if I were to increase this, you can see how there's varying thicknesses throughout the line. I'm not sure what's a good, I mean, we sort of see the noise scale on the previous one. So this one is now larger. It's going to be visually subtle. So we could go into the remapping, but I'm going to create a curve so we can remap it externally. And something that could be nice is pulling this. This is essentially increasing the bias. It's making it more likely for small values and large values to show up as such. And yeah, just by increasing that, you now see that our thin lines do indeed look pretty thin, and the thick ones are thick. So they transition a little bit quicker. And we do have the ability of scooting this along. As I pull this along, there's going to be more thin sections, which I also think is to our advantage in this particular one. I want to exaggerate it a little bit more, so I will have it deform double the amount, which is 2. Now you can see those lines get thicker in various places. The noise is going to be very dependent on height, so it's going to travel faster than we want it to. This noise, we can set it to whatever speed we like say 55, but this spline is going to be traveling up and down through a noise, which could create additional animation speed. I don't want that to happen. So this noise is going to be told that its vertical side, its Y, is going to be very tall. So I'm going to add a couple zeros on there, and now it's a very tall noise. And that very tall noise is essentially not going to, as it passes through a really stretched out vertical cloud of noise, it should look a lot more consistent. Now, our actual animation speed here seems slow. I'm not really seeing the transition, so I'm going to increase this. And what we want to see is these individual lines traveling around, and I want them to be very distinct. We want to see them as a group, so I'm going to shrink our, actually we want to increase the scale. Let's jump up to 500, and now we can, now you see that, oh, that looks way better. You see how we get kind of a grouping of them getting, that becomes thicker along those lines. Thus, going into fall off, we might not need to pull that quite as far. We can let these transition a little bit more. And I really like the thickness kind of carrying from one line to the next. And you see how this is, it's just a clean, it's a relatively simple, clean version of this. Increasing the number of sides on the end side to 12 should make these nice, consistently cylindrical sweep everywhere. And now we can just color and texturize these however we like. We've got a noise, a particular noise that we have complete control over. We could make the sweep editable, which actually could be a good idea. I wonder if we can do it with a, it's getting dangerous. I'm going to save this right where it is. I don't want to make this editable, but if we do, we could control the noise color and see it interactively in the viewport, which would be good, but I don't want to make it editable if we don't have to. I don't know if this will work, but I'm going to attempt to work with a vertex map without making this editable by creating a correction deformer. And a correction deformer should see, it's kind of choking on that. This is something that can happen. I did just save, so if I crash, I won't really lose anything, but it's not It's not, there might just be too many points here, and the correction deformer is just a bad way to go. It might wake up, it might not. I'm going to hold down the turn off checkbox for a moment and see if it will acknowledge. And if it doesn't, another workaround is to Control or Command R to say render. And the render is going to, every once in a while, Cinema is checking in to see if another command was input. If you hit render, it essentially interrupts everything else. And it's the same as like hitting escape, but escape doesn't tell you when it happened. If you hit render, it will tell you when it happened. Unfortunately, I think I threw that at something that is very, very, very heavily subdivided, or there's just something I didn't like about it. I'm going to give it a moment, but I think I might force quit. Fork tongue is saying that the correction deformer is both the best and worst tool. I don't use it too often, but I don't disagree. All right, I'm going to force quit. Too bad, but we literally should have lost nothing because I just saved it. Wow, look how beautiful all these are. I love the colors here. So nice. British Columbia. Cinema is opening. There we go. It just opened. Drag it to the proper monitor. Boink. All right. Now, just because it did not like that, I am going to make this editable. Keep in mind that you can create a copy of it, hold down Control or Command and turn it off. So there's one that we can go back to if need be. Now, this does need to be made editable, but I believe, yeah, all this stuff is still living here. Oh, yeah, that's something we're gonna have to do. We still need the deformation to happen after the fact. Yeah, hang on. I gotta think about this because if the, yeah, they're already in their final position there. So I got to undo. When we make this editable, undo, I need to make this editable without that having been deformed. So I'm going to pull that away, make it editable. And now they should, no, I don't want this one deforming it either. So they should, why are they all still up in the air? Maybe it just hasn't refreshed. No, it's still up. Is the spline up in the air? No, the spline is flat. I don't. It's hide this. Okay, the sweep or oh no, these are okay, sorry, my fault. Those are still, they're not children, but they're still in the same hierarchy. Make that editable before they're deformed, because now I need that result to get deformed upward. It's going to stretch them a little bit, but it is what it is. And then put this deform afterward. So now the thickness can come. They're a little more vertically oriented. I'm not going to be terribly fussed by that. Now let's save this as 1C and see if it is possible to create a other vertex color tag on it. And this vertex color tag will be driven via fields, and we can feed it whatever we like. In this particular case, we have this random field already, and excellent. As soon as I drag that in, we're going to see the colors in the viewport. This random field is actually feeding in random colors already. If we like that, we could just say, fine, that's great. Use that way. We do have the ability, of course, of colorizing it differently. So we can go into our color remap and say, yes, we want to do a color remap with a set color, or even better, a gradient. And now we do have the ability of cranking colors to any kind of spectrum that we want to be in here. It keeps jumping to the other screen. I'm going to ignore that one. So you can see I can determine which colors are showing up, and you see them right here in the viewport. And it's based on literally on the exact same noise field. So we can see it here interactively. And that's the advantage. And now that we've done that, if I deselect it, we won't see that result, but it is still really there. We're just not seeing it. So inside of, say, the luminance channel of a new material, and this would work in third-party renderers. You just have to feed it in the correct spots. We can feed the color vertex map into a vertex tag, a vertex shader, and applying that material to the object, we now are actually seeing that material get applied. And there's a lot of things that are neat on that. We could say to multiply it by a brighter than 100% brightness, and you see how bright those become. And yeah, those all get laid out. Make another material to perhaps apply onto this the vertical walls. I don't have a specific plan. We should make it, I mean, it's already very similar. I shouldn't have made it as similar as I did. I like trying to change it up a little bit, and we aimed a little close to the source material on this one. So apologies. What do I want? A gradient that is set to V, and now we get this nice glowy fall off. And I kind of like it inverted. And that can be any color. Let's push that here into a light teal. Yeah, get this upward glow. Turn off the color channel. Those will glow upward. It can be fading into any color that we like. Pull that back there. Let those travel upward. It can be shiny or not shiny. There, something like that. So that's going to start looking pretty weird and cool. And depending on how you set that up and frame it, then I think we've got the overall idea. Having said that, there are a lot of potential different approaches here, and it would be fun to explore other ones. I am going to end this one here, but there is a lot of possibilities and changes and things to make this more, to make it more unique and make it our own, to just change the effect. I gotta say though, I really love the way it looks from the underside. Like, that's just really neat. I like this the flat look. I don't know, the flat topographical look is really neat to me. Whee! Yeah, but I am going to wrap that one up there. I think we already spent a decent amount of time on it, even though I think we were constantly moving forward, which is good. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm not currently in the mood to try and make this one look super pretty, but there's a lot of things you can do as far as framing and zooming up and doing different effects on it, layouts, glows, light up with an HDR, getting through to a third-party renderer. A lot of potential things to be done there. I'm jumping into YouTube to see if there's any questions, because I started with one from Twitch. Darren. That's really, I'm trying to understand the question. What workflow with axis centers, PSR, would you recommend when modeling using complex clones and cloned instances, sweeps, etc.? Darren, I'm not entirely sure I'm following the question. Would you recommend modeling axis center when modeling using complex clones? What does that mean, modeling using complex clones? Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to wrap my brain around it, but that's just not making that much sense to me. Are there any options to make the S22 menus more like the old style? I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I don't recommend that you do that. This is kind of I don't know. It's my own personal preference, but I just think it's a good idea. If you need to do things to improve your workflow, that's a good thing. But it's going to happen all the time that you're going to end up behind a different computer, or there's going to be a new version of Cinema. You're going to do a refresh install. You've got it on your Mac and on your PC. You've got it on a laptop, and you're constantly going to have to update your layout. So the closer you can be to the vanilla layout, the more that you just get used to the new one. I've known people who will be in like Maya and they move into Cinema and they're like, I'm going to change all the shortcuts and everything into the Maya shortcuts. But then whenever they're not directly behind their machine, nothing works for them. So spending the time to learn the new layout it takes a little bit of time, but I'm completely used to the new one. And when I have to go to an older one, I'm like, wait, whoa, where are things? Because I've gotten used to it. I feel like the new layout is a lot more intuitive. Having said that, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a way of going to the older style But actually, it would probably be built into here if it was, and there isn't one automatically. But what you could do is, well, I guess you were saying like these menus. Are you talking about these menus? A lot of things got rearranged, but there's this layout, and I don't think you can rearrange these, can you? That's just code-based. But you could go into your older cinema, go to customize and save as a layout, and then load that layout into your new cinema. So it would remember the old and bring it into the new. But as I just said, I don't recommend that. Spending the time to learn the new is always going to be worth it. Bernard, I have no idea about Redshift for Mac. I mean, it's important to remember that even when Maxon purchased them, there's going to be a large development cycle to begin the process, integrate the teams, and start working on that, beta testing it before it goes out in the world. It's not like those things just happen on a snap. There was no work being done on it before it happened. So yeah, it's a little bit trickier. Crossfader. Set up espresso rig to dynamically see the radius of an object and rotate properly around something like this. All right, well, a little light espresso could be fun. Oh, okay. So this is from Pa Wiu. And it's something in Blender, but they are just rotating one shape on another one. But it does look like they're probably going to feed in maybe something a little more complex. No, it's still... Is he eventually going to travel the secondary one? Oh, that line is just traveling the secondary one. So this, your question specifically, can you make one shape rotate the correct amount on the secondary one? I don't think that is necessarily too crazy. Now, we could visualize it just like they were in a very simple way with splines, and maybe that's a good idea. Yeah, we'll do it with splines because we can complicate it very, very easily. Now, I'm going to use an end side. It's just something I like to do, so I can put exactly as many sides as I want, but you could do this with a circle spline. I'm going to view it very flat on, and seeing the individual little tick marks spinning, I think will be useful, as we just saw in their example. I shall do that using a Helix spline set to 0, 0, 0. It doesn't need to be too long, but for our quick setup purposes, I shall clone it, set it. I guess I could set it to object. That might save us some clicks later. So you can see I've got a bunch of copies of it. Spin that an additional 90 degrees, technically positive 90, so it's aiming inward. T for scale to shrink that, and I can see I've got these little tick marks that are evenly spaced. You see actually the lines aren't too smooth there. That might be able to be fixed by turning on the smooth rotation. Yeah, turning on the smooth rotation will actually line them up properly. You can see here that those are not meeting in the middle, and that's why this smooth rotation checkbox is there. It's going to kind of interpolate this in a more accurate way. And now you can see those individual lines. So just a quick way of visualizing this as we rotate it. In fact, dropping this down to 8 will be a better count for us. Dropping that inside of that inside, we now have the ability to copy and paste it and make whatever modification that we want. I'm going to set that to a 50. We're going to set it to 50 in radius. And I think these ratios are going to be very important. Now, when this is spinning around, do we want that to be automatic, or is that something that is independently keyframed? I'm not sure. I'm not, that's like different ramifications on the setup. In fact, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is like a gear setup, but if we move this exactly over 250, we could have that be rotating and spinning. And the best way to animate that, I think, would be to create a null, drop in our outer circle. I'll call that outer. And we can just rotate this inner null by whatever amount that we want. And that will become the base rotation. So I will do that. And later on we can randomize this. But currently I'm just going to record on B. And at the very end, that will have spun 360 degrees. Keyframe it again. So now we should just see that null spin. It's going to travel around, and we can see that move one full rotation. Now, let's say that as that rotates, we need that to do some sort of math and counteract the rotation. I do not have I have an idea of what to do to approach it. I do not have the actual math in my head. So first thing we do is save it. Wheel on wheel. Espresso. Alrighty. This null is going to be doing part of the action, so I will apply the espresso tag to that. Programming tags, espresso. Takes a second to pop up. Bing. Now, we need some variables here. Actually, yeah, I want to be able to change these. So we will, that can do the rotation, but I'm going to bring everything in as direct variables. So this null is actually going to be our rotate null. Outputting from there, we want the coordinate rotation B. That's its local rotation. Not its absolute rotation, it's local rotation. And then, specifically, we're going to be controlling the rotation of this outer circle. And I think that will also be its B. So we can say coordinates rotation B. So those are two variables, but one of the most important things here is going to be we need to work from the radiuses likely of the inner and outer. So I shall bring in the inner, bring in the outer, and we need the output of the object's property radius of both of them. Object property radius. Oh, there's two radiuses. I don't know which one. I'm on that end side, so there's two different variables. So just to keep this clean. That's all. Also, it's a little frustrating that the espresso nodes are like super pixel perfect. I can't make this bigger unless I aim perfectly. In order to be sure I'm grabbing the correct radius on the inner one, select the inner, go to object, and make sure I grab the correct radius and drag that over. Select the outer, drag in the proper radius. Because there's a secondary radius, which is based on the rounding. There's a radius for that, so you just want to make sure you have the right one. So we've kind of got all the ingredients here, but I don't know the correct mixture of them, if you will. Now let's just take a look. Let's be very direct here. If we drag the rotation of the rotation of that null, and feed it directly into the rotation B, which is going to be the rotation B of the outer one, it is going to be creating some sort of rotation, and it is going to be relative to that. So it actually doesn't do a horrible job. I mean, it doesn't look great, but you can see that as that spins, it is, I don't actually know. At a certain point, it's just like the total distance traveled, interestingly. Now, if we wanted to be, I wonder if there's just like a simple, yeah, there's going to be a lot of math here. It's just not fun. I just don't feel like it's fun to, this isn't a fun live stream question. So maybe I shouldn't have done it at all, but let's try multiplying. I'm going to search for a math node, and let's see what we can get away with not doing. So I'm going to take the current rotation and output it to the other rotation. Currently it's adding 0, but I'm going to say let's multiply. So currently it is spinning. Well, it's multiplying by 0 now. So if we say 1, you can see it is spinning the proper way, just not enough. So we could just start doing some guesses. So I could say like multiply 2. So I said, okay, multiply that rotation by 2. And you can see it seems to be spinning a lot better. Is it on the point perfectly? No, I think it's sliding a lot. You can see right there, it's kind of right in the middle of the square. And as I keep on going, it's going to be sliding along. So it's not quite fast enough. Now, my guess is it's going to be something like taking the inner radius minus the, taking the inner radius minus the outer radius, or the relative ratio of the two of them. And that's going to give us the proper result. Which you could, potentially that could mathematically give you exactly what you want. Because of the ratios we did, I feel like we might be able to guess, because it's going to be relatively clean, things like this 2.5. Yeah, it's closer. Once again, there's some people who are like, oh, here's the math, which could be fine. Yeah. I don't know. The Steve on YouTube is saying like 2 times radius divided by, or radius 2 divided by radius 1. So it'd be like a 4-to-1 ratio. Even that's, well, I mean, but if that was the case, I should be able to just type in the multiply by 4 because that's the ratio, and we'd see that go. It doesn't quite seem to be. I think 3 is too much. Yeah, it's still sliding. So I don't know. The math is doable, but it's not going to be fun to watch me just guess and checking math. You see the basic idea here. You see that it would be grabbing the inner radius and the outer radius. I honestly just don't want to continue on this one. It's even if I was building this one, I could go and Google something, or I would just start guess and checking based on my intuition. But at a certain point, it's just pure math. So there's not much to talk about. Now, Shane just said something about turn into a spirograph. I actually almost ordered a spirograph because I wanted to like try and emulate it. But turns out there's actually a spline in Cinema that does a lot of what a spirograph might do. And I just kind of never realized it was in there. It's called the Cycloid. And there's a good chance you kind of ignored this one because it doesn't, I don't know, it's not super intuitive because I don't even have a good vibe for exactly what this does. But check it out. If we grab the end angle and we keep on increasing it, this spline is going to continue and it's going to keep on spiraling further and further along, which by itself is kind of neat. And there are actually there's 3 different modes in here, the cycloid and epicycloid and a hypocycloid. I forget which one it is, but yeah, I think one of these is we'd have to do the math to get the layout to be perfect. But if you set this one up properly, then I think essentially you automatically kind of get the spirograph look. So yeah, this actually can create them in a straight line or in a spiral. I think a little bit of math might be needed to, like I said, make sure that these are overlapping in the proper spots. Is there a point count? Like, why are we, or is it just this angle? Maybe there's a point count. Yeah, but yeah, all of these different properties can be used, and you can spiral and do fun spirography things. Yeah, cycloid, the radius is another thing. It's very, like I said, it's very unintuitive. Like this can actually create these neat sine wave shapes, but it's all based on the ratio of these different radiuses. So like if we do this perfectly, you can actually get this bouncing spline. I only just ran into this a couple of weeks ago. So you get boing, 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 boing. And it's like there's no equation. It's just the ratio of these different things. So make those spiral. You know, it's actually might be another way of making a straight spline. It's not the best way because there's no control of the point count, but we have really big spirals. You get these. Eventually, you just see it's a bunch of circles offset in time and space. So I think this is the radius and then how much it's getting offset in space. So it's pretty cool. And if it is an epicycloid, then it's traveling in a circle instead of in a straight line. But yeah, it gets weird. Even that, look, as I increase this, I'm getting a really nice looking helix. Now, obviously, we can make helixes in other ways, and there's obviously more to this than that. It's going to spiral in and out. But yeah, it's a neat one to explore. So yeah, cycloid, it's weird. And there's definitely possibilities with it. Let's see. Diego, reaction diffusion. There are people have tutorials on reaction diffusion. There was Tim Clapham has a really good video on reaction diffusion. I always it's a very specific formula to get it to do the kind of proper growing. It's really cool, but I don't have it on the top of my head, so I will just recommend Tim Clapham's video on reaction diffusion. Juha, you can't put links in YouTube. If you want to give me a link, you have to go onto the Twitch. You head over to Twitch, Rocket Lasso, just search Rocket Lasso Twitch, and you can find there, and it's really easy to post a question. So if you do jump over there, I'll keep an eye out for it. But yeah, you cannot post a link here. Darren is saying Spline Pen that makes me use Illustrator more. I mean, how often are you drawing? are you going to draw in Cinema? I mean, I almost never use. I mean, I almost never use this tool, the Spline Pen Tool. Why are you talking about the Spline Pen Tool? The Spline Pen Tool I like. I mean, this is almost identical to the one in Illustrator, so I don't have a problem using this at all. The sketching one, maybe you don't like the results of that, but I really love like the ability to grab this and change the curves and move it around. I've always felt that like they updated this a couple versions back in Cinema, but I've always felt this was pretty intuitive, and the ability to grab the different handles and manipulate them in these different ways, like it's always worked really well. The sketch tool, like obviously that one is going to like create all sorts of it's going to try and subdivide in some very interesting, weird, pinchy ways. There are some settings to change the way that it's viewing it, but I don't have a strong intuition there. Mostly, I mean, for me, whenever I'm working with some sort of vector art, I always avoid Illustrator, and I make everything I can in Cinema, to the extent where, like, I really want a bunch of, maybe there's a plugin, who knows, but I really want a bunch of Mograph tools inside of Illustrator. Constantly in Illustrator, you're like, oh, I've got this graphic that I want to do, and I want to have a bunch of copies of it, and I want those copies to be traveling along a different line. So let's see, what's a good example here? Like, how hard would it be in Illustrator to, I don't know, in Cinema, it's such a trivial thing right here to, let's see, what do I need to do? Zero out the height, yeah. And we can get our spiral. The cloner can clone on an object. The object will be the helix, and lay that on the correct orientation. So like, it's doing this type of thing is so trivial in Cinema. I can hide the original one, and there we go. That's my vector line. That's what I wanted. Or I could say, oh, actually, I didn't want to align the clone, so let's flatten those out, and now they are flat. And now, they're two-dimensional, and I can do so many things, and I want to deform and instance and replicate. And if I change one, all the other ones change. Even like simple transitioning in a very parametric way. You can't do that in Illustrator, at least not vanilla, not that I'm aware of. So I almost always do all of my vector work in Cinema directly. Let's see, people chatting back and forth. Mick, what do you got here? How'd you go about creating this effect? A shell or cannonball cutting down a tree? That sounds intimidating. Hang on, got a little commercial here. Mink. Oh, this is from Sherlock. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. I watched the behind the scenes on this because this was I think Corridor Crew talks about this, and they call up the slow-mo guys who helped build this, and I think a lot of it was built for real, but some parts of it were not. But anyway, you're just talking about this type of tree explosion. I mean, I don't have super well. I mean, it's not a lot of this is things we've talked about before. Let's approximate it. I'm not gonna make a big old tree, but we can approximate it by creating this cylinder shape. Creating a break on this, I don't think is actually all that crazy. So here's the thought. Of course, we're going to use our Voronoi fracture. What do we do before basics of Voronoi fracture? I don't know. Turn off our point generation, grab another matrix object, and let's see, what am I thinking? I mean, I do like this grid-based distribution, so I can hit T for scale and scale that down until we're pretty close here. So if I were to feed this in as its point distribution, it's actually gonna make a bunch of vertical cuts, which is pretty cool, like all these super vertical cuts. Now, I don't actually want to do that, so we could push that further. I wonder if we can you drop a null in as a source? I've never tried. Yeah, so there's a null. Oop. If I move this null up, then hopefully, okay, it does come in as a source. So now you can see this null is now the closest thing for any of these chunks. So that becomes kind of an endpoint for that. If I make a second null and move this down here, I can drag that in as well, and that will become a second kind of cutoff point. So now all of our action is happening in the middle. That's not always going to be the case, but it works for these basics. Now I've kind of got this very vertical orientation because we have a very horizontal orientation for the points that we're feeding in. So there's a lot of those. Let's go to an endpoint here, drop this down, not quite so many. In fact, we're running this in a live stream, so I'm going to significantly decrease the number of points here. So you can see the number of subdivisions that are being fed through. In the matrix, adding in a random effector is going to add the random variation to it. That's actually pretty okay. If we do smaller numbers, the smaller we displace this, the more it's going to sort of maintain its vertical nature and not break them up too much. You can break it up as much as you need to. This is just kind of choosing stylistically what is going to give you the best outcome. Now, that's giving us a bunch of nice breaks there, and they're going to somewhat randomly make their way up to this top section. Having said that, the real way of getting kind of the vertical splinters, the entire tree has a very up and down sort of orientation. There's a cool parameter in the fracture that you can go into scale cells, and we can tell it to be a lot more, let's say, Y-oriented. So I'm going to make it 5 on that, and you see it's going to stretch those cells out, and they become very vertical. Now, I'm not sure how far we want to go on that, and it does seem to, I'm not quite sure what the algorithm does, but you see how it did push those upward and that downward, so it could be justified to try and, whoa. Yeah, okay, apparently, yeah, you can only go so far before that starts pushing back away again. So you can see how we've kind of got a reasonable distribution of these different pieces. So hopefully this is low poly enough that we can run this relatively smoothly. So I'm thinking I will not colorize the fragments, save this as 3. And yeah, let's just fling something at it. Now, especially with it, the very much the slow-mo that we are getting. Like here, it's very slow, so gravity doesn't really have much of a chance to take over, so we're just not even going to worry about that. Control D for dynamic settings, no gravity. Let's just fling something at this. I mean, we can't go too small or too fast because the dynamics won't catch it, or we'll have to start cranking our settings up. Now, we already did the shattering glass last week, so let's just do the capsule did a good job for us. So creating another capsule. Actually, I'm going to keep it really straightforward. In fact, back in the day, maybe it was a musket ball. So I'm going to make a really small sphere. We would probably make it even tinier if we can get away with it. But simulation, rigid body. There's no gravity, so it's not going anywhere. Custom initial velocity. You see Z plus is its orientation. So X, Y, Z. Crank this up to, I don't know, 999. Hit play. Let's just see how fast that is. Quite slow. I'm going to triple its speed. And we need the tree also to be dynamic. Simple as adding a rigid body to that. Hitting play, and now bonk, that's going to like bump its head against it. Bonk. Now, what we need to have happen in this case is crank the, well, this could be a collider body, so it just doesn't stop, but we can also go into its mass and crank its mass up. So give it a custom density, or it's just a straight up custom mass. But I can make this behave as if it's 10 times heavier than what it really is, and this should like plow through a lot harder. Oh, look at that really great looking cut right there. I didn't know it had this curvature to it, so it looks like a beaver went to it and started gnawing away. So now you can see how that's going to plow into it. Now it's still not heavy enough to just blast right through, but I could just keep on adding, bigger numbers here to the point where it's just going to blast right through. So I kind of feel like that's all we really need to do is push it along those lines. Adding in more segments is going to be the main thing. So that's running very quickly. So I'll make 4 times as many segments, and I'll add a lot more vertical randomness here. 35. And that, yeah, as I add more vertical randomness here, it's going to hopefully give us more variation in the way that those split. I think the overall effect is still going to be there. But yes, now you can see we get the bigger splinters up there, but more variation in the small ones. I could just keep on pushing that smaller and smaller, and that's actually working shockingly well. Now, if you didn't want the entire thing breaking, of course, we could limit certain sections that not all of it could break. Let's just do that really quickly. Let's say like this front half of the tree can shatter away, but this back half we want to not shatter away. So we did a similar-esque thing last week, but adding in a Mograph selection tag. You can see all the different, there's every single clone, every single point getting generated. Turning on in the tag fields. delete the freeze, create a linear fall off. Now you can see everything there is true, everything there is false or selected and not selected. And it just has a straight up threshold, so it just has a hard cutoff, but we can also be very specific and pull this down. I don't know if this is a bug per se, but make sure when you're playing with linear fields in general, it's very dangerous to drop it down to 0, because you'd think at 0, everything would be true and false on one side or the other. But when I go to 0, you see it disappears. I've actually been waiting to show that as an example because I run into it all the time, but it doesn't come up too much in these types of talks. But if I increase that again to any amount, like 0.001, it can now see it. I think that there might be there's like a small bug in Cinema there where it should be greater than or equals. Instead, it's just greater than or something like that. It's something very simple, but it is a small bug. But I could just scoot this wherever I wanted to. That's going to say that those are not dynamic objects. Probably a good idea to grab the bullet and just move it a little more frontal. And now, as simple as that, we can go into our dynamics tag, and there's a Mograph selection for what is dynamic. And just by dragging that in, those have now been told that they're dynamic and the other ones are not. Hit NA. Let's turn on some lovely SSAO and hit play. So those will shatter, and you see that there's an entire section in the back that is going to keep, we need a few more frames to see it. Let those fly away a little bit more. And wherever I left that, there's a chunk of them that just are not going to go anywhere. And I mean, I guess the upper part of the tree and the bottom one shouldn't. So we can just change the way the field lays out. I mean, it's super simple now. Take a look, select the fracture. Actually, no, we want this tag. There we go. This is currently a linear field, but on the linear field, I can say, actually, you're not a linear field. You're a box field. We can scoot that to wherever we want to. Something like that. Say all of those are breakable and all of those are not. So super easy to make a tweak there. Now the top, that's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. We get all these other pieces, and you know, it's, you know, this is it. This is what I want it to be. We could break it. There's so many places we could break it up more. Currently, we're just feeding a single null in. So this entire top part is just one, but that could be a matrix object with like 5 segments. And then that front tip would be broken up a little bit more. You have a lot of art directable power here to change it. And the size of these chunks is just the number of matrix objects. I'll push it up really far. We're not gonna have very many steps per frame here, but this is purely a factor of how many pieces we have. So you can see that, well, there's so many pieces now, it's having trouble shooting through. It's a cool little shatter, but the verticalness makes it look like splinters. Let's make this be, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure that we will be able to give this a mass that will be forced all the way through. We'll make it 10 times stronger, but based on the way it's built, I'm not sure that this actually could get all the way through. So yeah, that's really going to fight it based on the structure that's in there. So at this point, what I would do, if I'm trying to force this, which we are, make it not dynamic. So that sphere, our bullet, it'll be off. And just to speed this up, I'll turn off that calculation keyframe Z position. I'm not sure at what point it's traveled through, but let's say about 1 second in, we'll say this has traveled to the opposite side. So that has, this doesn't slow it down. That's going to do what it does. Oh, I didn't do it, but I should have set this to be ellipsoid calculation, and that makes it go really quick. And I mean, this one's gonna be slower, so I'll save it as another version. Hit play. Oh, let's make it, let's turn out the fracture. That was funny. So there's gonna be a lot of calculations because it's 55 times 55 number of chunks, actually slightly more than that, but this is going to force its way through smaller chunks. And I mean, look at that. I mean, this is unreasonably looking similar to what we're getting here. And this is real. Like, they actually did some of these effects with actual slow motion. As I said, they worked with the slow-mo guys, which is pretty cool. And in my distribution, I'm randomly letting these fade up and down. I should add more variation there so that it's not so dramatic of a transition from one thickness to the next, but we could do that just by doing more randomness and variation in the way we feed the matrix in. There's a lot of possibilities. I wonder, this is just a thought, but each of these chunks is going to be calculated by let's see what our frames per second are before I finish the thoughts. Yeah, we're at about 1 frame a second, 1.2 once it gets going, and it might slow down once those all start colliding. Currently, the shape is set to automatic, which probably means they're being calculated as a moving mesh or possibly a convex hull is what they're going to be calculated at. But I wonder, just because of the simplicity of these shapes, if we set those all to ellipsoid, which means they're all being calculated as like stretchy spheres, how much? What if our steps per frame are going to be better? Because that is by far the quicker calculating one. Although, okay, those all explode from each other, but with them exploding, you'd see that this is seemingly running way well, not necessarily. I don't know if we can trust that now because the ellipsoids are running into each other. So apparently the ellipsoids are not. That tells me information that I didn't know. I was always curious if the ellipsoid is trapped inside the inner bounding box or the outer bounding box or an average of the two. And this definitely tells me that it's not based on the inner bounding box. So I'm not sure which one is best on that, but leaving it to automatic clearly worked and it was not running too badly. So I think I will leave this one there, but it's a pretty cool shatter and it's not too hard to set up. Like very often we have to like work really hard to make things cooperate. In this case, we don't really, it just kind of works. Pretty cool. And then I know there's techniques for like generating particles, like X particles has stuff where it's like, oh, based on where these faces are as they break, you can create a secondary the secondary emission of small particles to fill in the gaps, get a little bit of like composited smoke in here. You could really like layer these up and make something pretty cool out of it. And a little gravity go a long way, but pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right, I shall save that one, and let's do another question. Mustafa is saying, is anyone up for a C4D competition? That's a good segue into everyone should be aware that there is a Rocket Lasso Slack channel, and it's going to be mostly the same people who are hanging out in the chats here. But if you like the asking questions, answering questions, constructive feedback, and contests and challenges, then you should head on over to the Rocket Lasso Slack. And you can get there by going to rocketlassoslack.com. Crossfader already put the link in Twitch. I'm going to put the link in the YouTube. I don't know. Actually, it probably won't come through as a link because I need the www. Hopefully that's a link now. But in any case, you can go and continue the conversation there. And there are different kinds of. I'm not sure which ones are happening right now, but sometimes there's like weekly drawing challenges and there's different contests. So yeah, it's a cool thing to go and do. And it's all just community driven. So just head over there, be helpful, be cool, try and answer as many questions as you ask. And it's a good place. Next question. Ooh, well, I'm not sure. MTR and MTR, but character cloth simulation, please. That is not a you're saying that there's no good character cloth simulation tutorial in cinema. There's one of the good reasons for that is there's two different cloth simulations in cinema. And one of them is designed to be cloth, but it's terrible with characters because it doesn't behave. You can't push it too far before it breaks. And that is the cloth simulation tutorial. But the problem is that the cloth simulation, not cloth simulation tutorial, just cloth simulation. The problem is that it's just it's an older system. It's been around since like Cinema 4D version like 8. So, and it hasn't been updated since then, like barely at all. And then there's the newer system. It's not like state of the art, but the newer system, which is the Softbody. The problem is that Softbodies are really cool, but they don't have all the cloth-based tags and information. Now, having said that, we have slowly and sort of accidentally been improving, making it so that cloth is behaving better. Or I'm sorry, get my words straight. We've been making it so Softbodies actually behave better as cloth than we ever had them working before. Now, this is not a good time or venue to make a comprehensive cloth simulation tutorial, but let's see if we can do a couple little basic things and how far we can push it. And we can just use this figure as a very good low poly proxy. Now, I would recommend this even with an entire character is like you'd put the rigid body structure inside, and that's what actually gets collided with. But in this case, let's begin by adding a simulation collider body tag. And currently it's going to apply all the tag to the children, like filtered down, 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 down. So the entire thing is dynamic and it's not going to fall. Now, let's make it difficult on ourselves by putting in a little bit of animation. Hang on. Excuse me. So, okay, this is going to be terrible. I'm just going to add in a vibrate tag because everybody has it. This would be a good use for signal, or you just do some actual character animation. I just want to stress test this, which is, and I would really do it like this, is just do something like a vibrate tag. Now, the limbs are going to bend in unrealistic ways. I am not worried about that. I'm going to allow it to bend 90 degrees in every orientation, relatively slowly, 0.25. If I hit play, then hopefully we'll see this arm is just going to start moving and wiggling around. Give ourselves some more frames. And that's working fine. I think we could probably even double this. So let's jump it up to 180 on every orientation. Now, that's fine. You got to be careful. Actually, I did see right there it's passing through the head. You got to be careful of that. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to lower this amount just slightly. Because if it actually passes through, like cloth, if a cloth is stuck between two things and it's passing through itself, like it's going to explode. It doesn't have anywhere to go. Now, we could also copy this tag to the lower arm. Now, this is going to not be an accurate elbow. But by putting a couple of vibrate tags around, and we could technically type in some different random seeds so they'll all bend slightly differently, then, I mean, it's going to be a little dangerous when it passes through itself, but let's just see what it does. So we can do something like that. I'm going to copy the same tag to the arm. Once again, let's type in 8 plus num. So now those are just kind of doing this funky little wiggling thing. Now, we technically could have made them not bend as badly, but it's fine. I don't care. And then, let's even make let's make the torso bend. So that's the upper body. I'll put another tag on there. Dragging a random seed. This one shouldn't rotate as far because it's just too much, but just a little extra motion. So we're purely building this as a cloth moving stress test, okay? Everybody on the same page? All right, let's save this for a soft body cloth tests. All right, now the figure's not technically at 0, which would be a good idea. The body's the main one I'm worried about, but this is where signal's better. But yeah, I'm just gonna work from here. Now, here's a super basic thing. Let's make the most basic possible thing. Let's put a poncho on this because that one we don't have to overthink. So if we were to move a plane up here, scale it down, hit NB so we can see our poly count. We want a few more polys in that. Jump it up to something like 2222. Make it editable. Select some of the inner polys. Now, this is not proper cloth, but this is the kind of the most basic thing I can think of to start out with. I'm not sure what the best shape here is going to be, but yeah, let's say something like that. Delete those out. They simply do not exist anymore. Make sure that this is not intersecting with a character on frame 0. Simply right-click and add a simulation soft body, and let's see what it does. We can hit save just to be safe, hit play, and now you can see that it's going to fall on the character and do something. It's on there, and it's now here's the thing: is this is already behaving faster and more robustly than cloth would be behaving. So that's already kind of an advantage. Now we're immediately seeing some problems, but we didn't change any settings yet. So let's do that. First of all, let's add I'm not sure if we want more or less friction, to tell you the truth. There's a little bit of balance, a decent amount of friction. But the main thing we're going to be changing is inside of a soft body. Keep in mind that these settings are very dependent on your poly count. If we have more polygons, each spring does more work. Well, that's not true. They do the exact same amount of work, but if there's twice as many polygons, it's twice as bendy on a single orientation. So first of all, structural is the stretchiness. I don't want any stretchiness, so I'm going to get rid of that. In fact, we'll put tons of damping in there. So it shouldn't be able to stretch too far. Shear is its ability to tilt over, like a house of cards kind of tilting over. And I don't mind if it does too much of that. And flexion is the one where it can kind of be really floppy. This is kind of the main setting in both splines and soft bodies for making it really bendable. So I'm going to lower that because I want it to be very bendable. Let's hit play and see what we get there. And immediately you see where it can pinch a little bit tighter there. It's free to do that. The hole is not too much bigger, but you see it's definitely not holding its shape too well. And you got to be careful where a lot of the, well, first of all, we're seeing some vibration in here. A lot of that could have to do with the structure being very high and the amount of damping. But you know what? All things considered, like, this is not doing that bad of a job. It looks okay. That could be fed into a subdivision surface and it should bend and everything should look okay. And it could even be put into a cloth NURBS and be given a little bit of thickness. Now, having done all that, we could, of course, increase our steps per frame. So Control D, Expert. There's firstly a collision margin. I'm not sure if getting rid of that is a good idea or a bad idea, but it's going to fit more snugly on the character. And then let's crank up our steps per frame to be at least 3 times the amount. Now, of course, that's going to make it take 3. Whoa. For some reason, oh, maybe it's in the cloth. Yeah, that makes some sort of sense. Okay, well, unfortunately, there's a thing where this cloth forgets where it was, and I put it into a subdivision surface not at the time of 0, and then it broke it. Like, we talk about being very careful about placing these things. Luckily, I can just reset PSR and move it pretty much back where I wanted, but that's a dangerous thing to do. You don't want to make changes not at the time of 0. So let's make the poncho stand out a little bit. So this is 3 times as many steps per frame. It should be very bendable, not very stretchy, more steps per frame. And it's not vibrating anymore, which is good. It's barely passing through the character. And we got rid of the margin, so it's actually pretty tightly on the character. And it's running reasonably well. And it's already built in automatically in cloth where it's not going to pass through itself. Having said that, if you're not too worried about passing through itself, a good idea would be inside of the soft body under collision. You'd say, don't worry about self collisions. And now it can pass through itself, but it should, in theory, calculate quicker because it's not worried about intersecting itself. Tell you the truth, in this particular circumstance, it doesn't really seem to be improving it too much, which is surprising, but maybe it's only when it's actually intersecting that it would be trying to do those calculations. So now that's kind of like version 1.0, and I will save that. Now, just for the sake of it, I will subdivide this one time, US, to do a just full-on subdivision. Now, this is 4 times as many polygons. It's going to take a lot more calculation time. I think we're safe to just hit play. It's going to be slower, but you should just see that it's going to behave a lot more like cloth because there's more polygons. It's more bendy. There's more stuff that can fold over and wrinkle on itself. You see it's taking on the contours of the body a little bit more accurately. All that is working better. So, just something to keep in mind. Yeah, layered. I mean, the draping and all that's not horrible. Okay, now let's try and address maybe some problems if we can. First of all, in this one, well, I kind of didn't want to do it on this poncho. Like, this poncho is just supposed to be like version 1 of like, okay, that's kind of a thing. So let's treat it as such, and I'm going to turn off the dynamics on that and hide it, because now let's do the simple version. I mean, like, more complex things would be like actually making some sort of shirt or pants or something. I'm gonna make it easy on myself and just put a cape on the character. Now, this is not necessarily going to be super easy. It makes it super easy in cloth because of like belting and fixed points. You don't get those for free when it comes to, yeah, this is going to be super tedious actually now I think about it, but let's see what we can do. What's the easiest way of doing this? I feel like a loft would be, but what's the super duper duper basic one? T for scale. Make it not too wide. That's fine. Now we move this up to where the cape would begin, and I'm going to go way low on the polygons because, like I said, there's no good way of doing this, even though it's a better system. Make it editable. Select these points. T for scale. Scale down a little bit. Grow. UI. Shrink. Oh, let me shrink not on Z. Shrink. Grow. Shrink. Grow. Shrink. Grow. Shrink. I'm growing selection, shrinking what I currently have. It's just a way of transitioning into this skinnier shape and not changing the point count. So now you can see I've got all these individual points. Now, what we'd actually have to do is make these be locked. And this is only something I've started very, very recently doing, is actually locking these points onto the actual mesh of the character. Now, he's already bent a little bit, so these are not perfectly aligned. And actually, surprisingly, I lucked out where the point counts are very similar. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn on snapping. I'm no, what do we want to do? What's the shortcut? I'm blanking on the shortcut. I thought, oh, it's letter P, not UP, but just P. So we hit letter P, and now you can see we got all these snapping settings. I can temporarily snap or tear it off. So I can say, yes, enable snap, and it's currently enabling vertex snap, which is actually what I want. So I could grab any one of these points, just go E for the move tool, and I'll start here, and I can just wiggle around and snap to the exact point that I want to. So this becomes exactly in these locations. Exactly there. Exactly there. Of course, when I said exactly, that's not exactly. That's why I say wiggle it around, like pull it away before you pull it back, and then it snaps into place. So those all seem to be pretty well in that spot, and you see that those were matching. So I've kind of made it easy on myself. Turn off snapping. We don't need that anymore. Here's where it gets maybe tricky and or tedious, is we need to manually belt these points on. We're going to make it simple on ourselves and only put 2 points on to start out with. Save it again. V cape. All right, here's what we're going to have to do. I have to select this singular point, go to structure, and see that's point number 5. We also need to go onto the figure and go to points and select its equivalent point and see that's point 16. So we need point 5 to connect to point 16. Needs to be done manually, but we recently, well, at least I recently found out that you can use fixed connectors for this job. So I don't know actually if we need to. I'm going to try making it a child of the plane, but my intuition says that we have to make it a child of the body. So here is a connector. I want it to be a fixed connector, connecting the, I'm going to move it. I'm going to put it in the bottom. It's on the bottom, and we already know that that is the polygon point number 5. So it's linking to there. It's also now going to link to, I think the figure is the upper part, right? Nope. It's upper body. That's the one. So connector also links to upper body, and that is polygon point number 16. So that should be linking those two to each other. It was 16, right? Upper body, point, structure, 16. Yeah, it seems like the fixed connector is a little bit stretchy. Oh, but it's still 0. I guess I should zero it out. Reset SR is going to jump up here. Tell you the truth, I think it would be a best idea if I move that, hit Shift S, and that'll turn on snapping again, and snap that to the same point. So there we go. Now it's actually snapped there. Now it's a single connection. And, you know, I'm going to rename this to be 516 because I know I'm going to forget. Create a copy of this. And what do we want to connect to? I want this point, which is point 0, to connect to the equivalent point 0 and 56. 0, 56. All right. It does the same thing, except this one goes from 56 and it goes to 0. We also need to move this and snap it to that point. Turn off snapping, Shift S is that. And now hopefully those are connected. I don't know if it's going to work because I think that we need to make these a child of the cape. But like I said, in cloth, you could just make these fixed connections, make them a child, or you could use the belting tool. We can't do that here. But let's hit play. And immediately they are acting as if they're broken. So I'm going to attempt to make these children of the upper body. And we'll see if that works. They, again, immediately break. Oh, I guess actually I'm going to undo because I didn't turn this into cloth. Copy the cloth that we are already working from, the soft body, and let's enable it to be dynamic. Save it again. Let's see what happens. Okay, nothing good. It's like super exploding. Okay, now move the connectors to the upper body, see if that changes anything. I mean, I can't tell, but it seems like the first couple frames seem okay. Now, these are both technically fixed connectors, so why is that drifting so far away? It's a good question. We have regions of influence that can be dangerous, where it's like trying to spread out too far. I'm going to set that down to 1 and 1. And then also we have ignore collisions. I'm going to turn that off. I don't want to ignore the collisions. These can collide with each other. So hit play. Okay, it's trying harder to keep those there, but I got to say, not doing a great job. It's super freaking out. This was working really well when we were doing the sequence, but that was only a single connection point, so I'm not sure. Now, these are technically fixed connections. Maybe that's not a good idea. I'm going to change them to ball and sockets. It's really large because we're working on small scale, so I'll chop those down to 5. So those are now being told that, okay, you can rotate. I don't think that's going to change much. I mean, technically it's a little more stable. But let's see what we can do. We've already got our steps per frame cranked up, and we've already got our margin dropped down. So it's almost like we've already done the things I would typically do to make that work better. Yeah, not great. The ability to belt these quickly would be good, but they are not cooperating very much at all. I mean, increasing the region of influence doesn't really seem to help much. You can see it's trying to connect that one point over here, but it's not doing a great job of pulling it. Now we could use springs, but that has its own problems as well. We can try. I don't think it's going to take too long because I'm going to hold down Shift as I have both of those selected. Simulate spring. It's going to make them children. Not only children, it's going to automatically put them in the correct position. And now I think I can select this object A, object B, right click and say copy, and then go to the spring and paste identical, and then we might have to do it several times as it adapts to the proper settings. Yeah, and then we do that, and then a third time paste, and now it is taking on all those settings, which is nice. And now we have to do the same thing on the other one. Copy those settings, and now you can see that what's happening is it currently doesn't have objects, so it can't put the proper settings there. So now that those are existing, we can paste again, and it turns on those settings, and now it does have all the final settings we need. So we have to paste a third time, which is it makes sense, but still a little ridiculous. So now we have these connectors. I'm going to turn off the connectors, and let's just see if the springs by default they are immediately exploding. The rest length is set to 100. I'm going to click that. It'll actually set them both down to 0. And well, okay, now you can see that it's not going crazy, but and they're not. It's working better. So now I'm going to start increasing the stiffness, which is going to pull them more. Okay, well, increasing the stiffness too much is immediately making them explode away. So you can see it's kind of holding it there, but they're sliding away. If I start increasing the stiffness, it's going to pull it closer and closer. But I think at a certain point, they're going to explode, and it's just going to fly away. Now, the only way I've ever found to get around that, well, first of all, damping does have a effect on that. So I lowered the damping, and it's not exploding at 5 now, but I don't think it's going to be long until they do explode. Actually, now I've cranked it up to about 8, and they're pretty close to hanging onto the proper spot. Now it's visually freaking out there, but that's just the springs. That's not really a variable. So you see we're just dealing with that. The springs are also, I thought they maybe made them ignore, but they're not. So it is passing through the body an awful lot, which isn't great. But what I was going to say is the only other thing that you can do to improve that is crank up your steps per frame, which usually does help, but there are limits to how far you can push that. So yeah, now you can see those are kind of stuck, and it's a better simulation, but it's so hard to belt things, even though it's going to be more accurate in its ability to like bend and drape and whatnot. And here's some of the additional problems. If we were to now, I mean, I guess it happens with cloth as well. It doesn't like these pinches, but you know, that's just, I think, inherent to simulation. If we subdivide this more, it's going to change the point count, and we're going to have to manually relink those again. So that's not great either. There's a lot of variables there. Yeah, this just forced it through the body, which is of course not a good thing either. All of this would work better if we told this dynamically to maybe, and this is probably not a great idea, but I'm gonna tell it to view it as ellipse. Look how quick it is, man. Okay, so I turned these all to be calculated as ellipsoids, and look how quick it calculates now, because this cloth is just thinking all of these are the closest approximation to a sphere that they could possibly be. And you can see that we're now running at 55, between 30 and 55 frames per second, which is a significant improvement. Now, I mean, I don't know how well this is going to be stuck on the character, to tell you the truth. I mean, it eventually does, he pats his butt and then the entire thing explodes. But let's make the entire thing vibrate and just see how, kind of, like I said, this is just a test procedure, so we can just start throwing it in. Now, I mean, okay, I'm impressed that it's holding on. Look at, see, well, this is why this is good, is you see it actually wrapped around the body there. Like this is actually spinning and wrapping around the body, and we're getting really nice frames per second. Now, of course, this attachment point isn't amazing, and it does seem to be passing through the body a little bit. Keep in mind, it's now a sphere that it's colliding with, and we could improve that. But its ability to like whip around and wrap around the body and all that, it's just a better simulation. No easy way. I mean, we could subdivide it further, but they wouldn't be running the calculations on that. But yeah, look, the way it whips it and wraps around the body, like that's so good. So you can see where that improvement comes in. Now that's just wiggling back and forth one direction. Those will still snap into place, but you gotta be careful when it comes to vibration. There's like an initial state on the vibration. So it's like the character's way offset, and then suddenly the cloth has to snap there. Now that could be fine, but it is potentially dangerous. So typically what I do is I actually keyframe the amplitude if I'm doing this type of setup. So right around now, we could say that's moving around a lot. So I'll keyframe that, then rewind. And at the 0 point, say that these are all 0, 0, 0. And that should, and then you have to manually reset, but I'm going to reset the character. And now he's at 0, 0, 0. And now he slowly transitions into animating. So it doesn't have to snap into its initial position. It's a small detail there. But I mean, well, right here, you're seeing the contradiction in everything is we can get this character moving and whipping around. And it's calculating quickly and it's calculating pretty dang accurately, but we have to work so hard to make this like attach. And it's going to be very hard to make improvements from there. But like, I don't know, like you couldn't get cloth to work this well, I don't think. Like look how like this essentially hasn't really broken, and we're like, you know, almost 1,000 frames in here. So I can't make it any more definitive than that. There's just more effort to be put into it. You know, and putting a couple extra springs in here so it's connected at more points would be a good idea. But this whole thing, I'd want to be at least twice as many subdivisions so you could get better wrinkles and folds. And it's not even, I mean, it's still cloth simulation, but it's pretty low resolution cloth simulation. So, but it's something. I mean, I'll just say I wish that we had a better cloth simulation in cinema. It just, we just don't have it. I know different softwares have better or worse ones, and the Marvelous Designer is the one that's got the best, and that was not even designed for like movies or character animation, even though it's got really great uses in that world. I'm gonna save that as far as I'm gonna attempt to take this one, but that is the extent that I can push that right now without doing deeper research. Let's see. Some of these typed out questions get difficult. Like when the typed out question is really specific to a particular instance, it gets kind of challenging to even read it. Like I cloned a circle, its rotation set driven to its position to rotate correctly. But when cloning the object and try to randomize the position keyframes, rotation is recognized by the cloner. Presumably, if you say set driver, then that means you did set driver, set driven, which means it makes an expresso tag, and cloners don't acknowledge expresso. You have to make it editable. Like it won't acknowledge individual expresso tags as individual clones. You have to make it editable. I talk about that in next week's tutorial. I talk about that concept a little bit, how you have to make cloners editable, but that's next week. Sorry, Trey. Trey is asking about after you've made a character, about exporting it to like a waveform or FBX as a way of sharing with other programs. I never share with other programs, so I know almost nothing about importing and exporting because I start and end everything in Cinema. So sorry, I cannot be of more help on that. Let's see. Nelson, what do you got? Paper being pulled from the top and bottom edges. 10 seconds in. Let's see what we've got. No audio, please. Apparently you can call out the time specifically in Vimeo, so that's good to know. We got some more paper ribbons. Look, kind of laying on their side. Ring. Well, this is the same animation piece that we did a bunch of stuff a couple weeks ago. about folding ribbons, and you're essentially asking about unfolding ribbons. To a degree, you could just think of it as reversing the shots. I mean, I'm planning on recording a tutorial along these lines. I haven't gotten to it yet, and I don't want to just remake what we had last time. Let me think. I've got an upcoming tutorial planned, not done. I have done practices on it, but not final. All right, my compromise here, instead of doing the entire thing, is let's open up our file from a couple weeks ago. So if anybody isn't familiar, there's a different episode you can go and check out to find this. I just have to see how quickly I can find it. I'm going to guess episode 20. Nope, it's got to be episode 21 then. That's super recent. Nope, but it's episode 21. All right, in episode 21, scene files. I think this is the file. Yeah, okay, so the paper looks terrible, but here was the idea. So there are a bunch of floors that are trapping our simulation into a essentially two-dimensional world. And because we're in this two-dimensional world, it's really easy to throw in a helix. Well, this is just a straight spline with a series of subdivisions. And if I play, you can see that just this spline, hopefully this works smooth enough, you can see that this spline has a lot of friction, and it's going to start layering its way up. And you can see how it layers and layers and layers. And this gives us a really nice kind of basic ribbon idea. So, you know, that's all working quite nicely. And then to get your final ribbon, you put that into an extrude, and now it extrudes it two-dimensionally, which is pretty cool. So that's like the basic idea. Now, essentially, you're just asking a question of how do we rewind this process? Well, you could do the basic one, which would be bake it. We could bake this and then just play it backwards. You guys will render it out and, you know, reverse the footage. But assuming that we do want to, you know, kind of have it in the scene working, let's work, you know, we're back on the noodle. And once again, I'm not going to spend any time on it, but the important thing is that you get the radius of the individual points and the distance, and then you set the margin. As I said, and here, I'll even put a link to the episode. Actually, I can't. Well, I can't. I just have to manually find it. So it's, jump into, just give me a moment. I'll put a link to these episodes so people can go find it and catch up if they want to. Rocket Lasso Live episode 21. Easy enough. And let's see, I'm even going to scrub approximately to the right time code. Right, this is approximately the right time code. Copy URL at the current time, paste, and paste. So if anybody's lost, you can go and catch up there. But we end up with this noodle look. Here is my thoughts. I'm going to make it a lot shorter. So currently it is really, really big. Let's see how short we make it. I'm going to take off a zero, so it's way shorter. Does this kind of give us a little folding? No, unfortunately not quite. So I'm going to double the amount, double. The important thing here is always, if I double the height, I have to double the subdivision, do the same thing to both. So that's close. I guess I'll double it one more time. Times two. Boing. Rewind. And now we should get a couple of folds, but it's not so long that we can't undo it. Now that's doing a fine job of piling up. So now I guess this kind of goes back to some of the things we were just playing with. If I want to make a spring probably, so I have to make this editable. I can make the helix editable, which means we can't make changes, which is a little dangerous. Actually, we don't need to make it editable. No, we don't have to make it editable. We might need to make it editable for a moment to see how many points that there are, but that should be, yeah, that's 0.0, but the last point is 160. So we just need to know that information. I don't think we need to make it editable. So creating a spring, I'm not entirely sure the way I'm going to do this, but here's an interesting thought. Making the spring, linking the spring to the helix that's going to link to nothing. It's going to link to a polygon point, specifically point 160, a limited radius. Now you can see it is attempting to connect up to that top point. Now it has a rest length. We could increase that. But my thought is we actually want the rest length to be 0. But I'm going to give it a stiffness of 0. So that means it should be pretty much ignoring it. It does break right away. I don't know if that is, maybe a 0 is bad. It still seems to break right away. Maybe it does need to be made editable. Maybe it's just too far and it breaks right away. Maybe it needs to be made editable. I'm just trying to see if we can make the spring not explode. No, even if we make it editable, it's similar. Maybe it's just too far away and that automatically breaks it. I'm going to hit Shift S, turn off the sweep, and move this on X, Y, and Z. It's going to snap right to that top point, and now hopefully it is actually there. And now I can set the rest length, which is 0. Let's see if that still breaks right away. Let's try increasing the region of influence. I'm just going to keep changing random settings until I get some sort of result here. And once again, it is possible we need to make it editable. No, even that's still not acknowledging it properly. Where's our steps per frame in here? Not that high. I'm going to crank it up to 25. It's flipping out, but it's not holding on to it. Yeah, that's not super encouraging. Crank up the stiffness. I'm going to pull it out of the hierarchy entirely. When in doubt, start simplifying. I'm still stuck on the make editable thing, but like there's so many other variables going on right now. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a limitation or if I'm just not quite doing something right here. I guess it won't take too long to, I'm gonna turn off the spring. Let's try a fixed connector. If that doesn't work, then I might have to dead end this one for now and come back and visit it. Once again, let's have that snap up to the first point. This connector wants to connect to the helix, specifically the polygon point of count 160. That should be all we need to do. Hit play. No, it seems to, yeah, it breaks right away. We actually had run into a lot of trouble with strings recently. I don't know if it was bugs or if I was just not doing it correctly, but you can do spline dynamics, but those pass through themselves, I think. Do spline dynamics pass through themselves? I don't remember. I'll do a quick test because they're super simple setup. If it does work, hair or spline dynamics, which is based on hair, hit play. So it should fall, but of course it doesn't see the floors. I don't know if it's programmed to see the floors at all. Hair collider. Hard to tell. Nope, it's passing right through. Unfortunate. So our entire 2D world doesn't work, but if we made a plane and put that there, does that at least collide with that? Yeah, I think so. Nope. Yes, no. Yep. Oh, it's still passing right through. So does it have to be made editable to work? Nope. Still what? Yeah. I don't know. I got to do some tests with spline dynamics because maybe they're just completely broken right now. Yeah, apologies, but I just don't. This one's not cooperating right now, and I can think of other methods, but they're starting to get really long and tedious, and it's no good for a live stream. Not like this. So dead ending that one for now, but we can tackle it again at some point. Let's see, what do we got? Java. It's an Instagram link asking, can this be dynamic? Let's see. Oops. What did I just do? Bing. Boink. All right. Let me play for a moment. Turn off the audio. All right. This is from Clara Turn. Is the E silent? I'm terrible about names. It's Cinema 4D. It's called Together Apart. Let's see what we got. Kind of a Slinky type look. And you were asking, can it be dynamic? I mean, is this one, is it not dynamic? It almost seems to be. That's neat. I like. One thing I'm having trouble seeing is, okay, there is just a big gap. I was wondering if they were connected like a proper tube or if they were just like a series of rings with just a little bit of space between them. So you're asking if they could be, if we could do this dynamically. Yes, is the short answer. The more complicated answer is, what are we thinking we will actually want to do with them? So here's, what's my actual thought here? If we make a cylinder, make it exactly 10 units tall, 200 radius, so we get something like that. Now, if we were to just use these as dynamics, the most straightforward way to do it would be just a series of fixed connectors, which is completely acceptable. Let's just spend a moment and make a few. Hopefully it works all right. And we get the doubling effect, which is always nice. So those both become dynamic. And then we need a series of copies here, but I will begin with just one copy, which will move up 20 units. There needs to be a gap in between. The gap is very important. Then there's a connection between them. Dynamics connector. And that needs to move up a very precise amount as well, which is 15 maybe? No, apparently exactly 10. Oh yeah, because that's half below and half above, so that makes sense. Put this inside of that cylinder because I always like it being the child of one of them. And this will link, actually I usually like going from top to bottom, but it's just not the way we're building it. Top to bottom is cleaner though. It just organizes itself in a cleaner mental way. So yeah, just to keep it simple, I'm going to go top to bottom. So this is currently at 0, 0, 0, okay? Then we'll have a second cylinder, and that is going to be below it. So I shall say minus 10. Nope, I'm sorry, not minus 10, minus 20. Minus 20. Now, that connector is going to be now at negative 10. So you see it's exactly halfway in between them. So the reason I like doing it in this order is because it's just very logical to say, okay, this connector is going to connect from the top one to the one above it to the one below it. It's very kind of a logical thing to do. Now, currently that's set to hinge. Ultimately, we're going to want it to be ball and socket because it can rotate in all directions. Although I think that's fine. We can leave it in ball and socket, but you might want to just rotate on 2 directions, not 3. Having done that, we actually would want a child there. So what I might do is delete that, copy the cylinder and say minus 20. And now this connector connects to its child. And now that one's got a blank one ready to connect to whatever is below it. This floor is just getting in our way right now. I move it to the top temporarily, visually hide it. We'll fix it later. Fix it in post. Grab both cylinders, hold down control, make a duplicate of both of them. And now we have to subtract again by the current count. So I think it's be minus 40. Take their current number and say minus 40. And now we get that. It's not too complicated because now we just grab the last one we didn't use and connect it to the next one. And now we can easily do a doubling. So I make a copy, whatever this number is, minus 80. And it's just double the previous amount. Grab that one connector we didn't use, connect to the next one. And you can see how very easily we can start doubling the effect. Now it gets a little harder to copy once we run out of sections here, but now it's minus 160. Once again, just doubling. I can see which one wasn't selected. That becomes the connection. In order to make this look good, we will need a couple more copies. Copy again. I'm starting to not be able to do the mental math. So minus 160 times 2, just to be certain. And now that will move again correctly. Select, do that again. And here, this will be our last doubling. Select all of them again. It's going to be a little hard to make that duplicate in the correct spot down here. Yep, I knew I was going to miss it. I don't even know if there's enough room to do it. So you see these are not, they're all children of that one. I'm trying to think of what the best way to do this is. I guess the original, is that safe? It's so dangerous because I can just copy it above. Yeah, I think that's fine. I can copy it above and just make sure that when I go to select, I'll grab the second group of them. Take that minus 160. Oh, wait. Minus parentheses. Oh, it looks like I lost the number. Let me make sure that I got the correct selection. There we go. Minus parentheses 160 times 4. It's the last number I remember, so I'm doubling it twice. Do that. Now they are offset. So, but the point being, I'll grab that last connection, link it over. Hopefully it's all working. The point being is, even though it's tedious to do this connection, and I think there's even like scripts out there and whatnot that might automate this a little bit more. You can see how quickly you get the doubling. So you don't actually end up making that many connections. That's assuming I did this properly, which maybe I didn't. I could scoot that up in the air, but I'm just going to move the floor down below. And now we should hopefully have a whole series of connections here. They are dynamic, and I should probably group them. So I'll create a null, select all of these, and make them a child of the null just for organizational purposes. Makes it a lot easier to do something like that. Also, now I can collapse all of them, expand all of them, select the top dynamics tag, scroll down to the bottom dynamics tag, and it's super easy to change the shape. Currently, it's set to automatic. I would love to make this a sphere, and that might even be possible. But let's try and setting it to a cylinder y-axis. So they're all y-axis cylinders. Before we do anything, and I might have horribly messed something up. Oh, I'm crossing my fingers I didn't, but let's save it. 5A. I don't even know what to call this. It's kind of like a Slinky, but I don't know. Segment connectors. Okay, you never know how the dynamics are going to handle things. So in this type of situation, make sure you hit 1 frame forward, 2 frames forward. It seems to be moving okay, so it's safe to hit go, hit play, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, not a good start, tell you the truth. Although, I mean, they seem to be connected properly, but yeah, it's a little dangerous. Okay, couple things. Well, let's just start working our way through. First of all, I'm going to search for the word C-O-N, and I can select all the connectors. Currently, they're saying ignore collisions. I don't want to ignore the collisions. They can collide with each other. That's fine. So hit play, and they should run into each other. Now, they're starting to do this oscillation where it's echoing all the way through. I honestly can't think of a better way of fixing that except for cranking up our steps per frame and not letting it get to that point. Oop, it gets there really quickly anyway. Unfortunately, I can't tell if I made my connections correctly. I'm going to attempt to do it to find out by tilting the entire thing sideways and seeing if that can handle that a little better. It's really hard to tell. I mean, if all of those are correct and visually I mean, it's exploding, but they do seem to be correctly connected. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of mechanically not working very quickly, sadly. Yep. So not much we can do. Yeah, this is, oh dear. This connection is wrong. 32 is connecting to cylinder 1. Maybe it's because I didn't, maybe it's because I didn't copy paste and I control dragged. Okay, you know what? There's a way of salvaging this. It's going to be a little bit tedious, but it's not actually too bad. Check this out. Let's see if this works. All right. I messed up these connectors. All the structure seems to be there, but it's not working. We need to automate this because it's going to take too long to fix. So here's what we're going to do. Right click on this top connector and add some espresso. We could do it. We're going to do this, the simplest, like the dumb method, the very simplistic method. There's smarter ways of building it, but this is going to be the simplest one. So actually, this is also in next week's tutorial, but grabbing this connector what is that connector supposed to do? Well, this connector is supposed to connect to its parent, and it's supposed to connect to its parent's next sibling. But it's relative to the Expresso tag. So this is actually pretty important. I'm going to drag the Expresso tag in and output the Expresso as an object. Search for the hierarchy node. And this hierarchy node is going to accept the Expresso tag as an object. And it would actually currently want to iterate. It would say, oh, travel down, then iterate by going next, 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 next. But actually, if I just delete out the start and iteration path, it's now just outputting the connector object. So wherever the Expresso is, it's outputting the current connector. So that's actually really good. So this connector should be whatever this is outputting. So that is now that object. Now, with that in mind, we need to control two things from it. And that is the object above it, which is that one, and the object below it, which is this one. But this is already outputting different objects. Let's search for the reference node. REF, there's reference. So this is currently inputting whatever object that the Expresso tag is on. So object A should be whatever the Expresso tag is on, travel up. So let's type in U, travel up one layer. That's going to input into object A. Then we can create another duplicate of this. And whatever the Expresso tag is on, I want it to travel up and then go next. So the path becomes up, or UN, up next. Feed that into object B. So without having changed anything else, we just got these simple 5 nodes, although, you know, hierarchy and reference nodes are not simple nodes, but this was a very simple implementation of them. Based on that, if I click on it, you now see that this is linking 32 to 33. So excellent, it has automatically done that. So if we can get this to work, I can just search for the word connector, and we might be able to copy the children. Is that safe to do? I think it might be. I'm going to save it as a way of saving a little bit of time. I'm going to copy that to the parent, select same or copy tag to children. And honestly, if we just like hit one frame forward, it should force all the connections to be correct. 35 connected to 36. So that should have fixed all of them. So now I can select all the children tags, delete, and I'll just keep this one in case we need it and turn that off. So we've now used Expresso to fix all the connections for us. And we didn't even have to think about it. So these should all now be the correct connections. And I feel confident in just hitting save. Hit play. And let's see. What's going on here? Oh, very important. It worked perfectly, but something to keep in mind is the very last one, it doesn't have a next to connect to. So it's currently connecting to nothing, and this bottom one needs to be turned off. That one shouldn't exist. So that's why it wasn't moving. So hit play, and that's better now. Okay, this is now working. Excellent. So that did fix it. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So now we hit 999, hits play, and it's actually bouncy, and now we can see them begin to fall over and behave in a very cool way, actually. That's really neat. So it's kind of like a Slinky, not entirely, but now just based on not colliding with each other, I'm sorry, they are colliding with each other, so they can't bend that far, and now you can see how it's going to automatically create kind of these fun little bends and ripples and whatnot. So automatically, that's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah, it's really neat. Because that's working, I do want to, let's make double the stack and see if I can do a better job of it this time. Collapse the entire hierarchy. If it doesn't work, we can just copy Expresso again. You saw how easy that was. Copy, paste everything. In fact, I'm going to grab all these. Cut, paste. So that should be in the proper order. And I can grab all of these bottom half and move them down. Now, I do not know the math here, so this is maybe not smart, but I'm just going to eyeball moving it down the proper distance. Actually, if holding down shift. Yeah, holding down shift, we did a perfect unit of 10, so that actually put it the exact place I wanted it to be. So if I'm doing this properly, I should be able to now make that bottom one, yes, make a connection and connect 64 to 32. With any luck, that did update. Now we have double the stack. Is that double the stack? Almost doesn't. Is that twice as tall? It doesn't feel twice as tall. Oh, it's traveling through the floor. Okay, I'll select everything. Put it back into the null. Collapse it, and once again, move the floor down. There we go. I was like, it seems not long enough. All right, everything should be working. I'll just save again. Hit play. It's still running very quickly. And now we get, yeah, a lot more fun. Yeah, so well, this is the dynamic version. It is there. It is dynamic. It's going to do its thing. I love how these like are traveling through like these little ripple effects. Okay, where do we go from here? I mean, I don't want to loop it back onto itself because then we're getting too similar to what the original reference was. We could apply forces to it. We can, I mean, currently has a particular type of connection. If we wanted to, we could select all of the connectors, search for connect, and change it to a different type of connector. If we were to say, make this a two-dimensional connector, or I'm sorry, only work on one axis type of thing with a hinge. And I'm not sure what the current orientation is. So let's zoom way up. Way up. Come on. Come on. Wow, that's not cooperating. There it is. Okay, so now you see this hinge is existing in this orientation right there in between. So now it can't tilt in 3 dimensions. It can only tilt in 2 dimensions. So you're going to see, yeah, it's going to alternate like that, and it's going to be kind of trapped in that particular orientation as far as the entire structure is designed. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's just something that you can do. I'm going to undo, make them both, make them bendy again. Now, Control D, and turn off gravity. General gravity 0. And now we can put in whatever we like. Let's make a turbulence. Forces, turbulence. Now this is pretty big. So we're going to need a large turbulence. 55. Remember, gravity is 40. So this is a little stronger than gravity. Scale, pretty large. Frequencies, all right. So now, yeah. So now we've got a turbulence that's allowed to bend wherever it wants with no gravity. The spacing between them is going to be how far they can bend. So technically we could let those bend a lot more. I don't know how easily can we make that work. Let's say we want to double the height. So I think it might be as simple as selecting all of them, grab the Y position, X times 2. So it's going to make them twice. Ooh, dear. Didn't I hit X? X times 2. Huh. I don't know. I must have mistyped, but now you can see there's twice as much space in between them. But let's keep in mind that we need the connector to also be at the halfway point. Otherwise, they'll bend a little bit strangely. So this is currently at -10, but we need every connector to be at -20, I believe. Let me test it. -20. Yeah, -20 is the halfway point. So search for connect. And let's make sure that all of those are set not to a relative one, but an absolute -20. An absolute -20, which is relative because they're all in a parent. So now they're all at the exact halfway point. And now this essentially should have the ability to bend twice as far because, it's below the ground. This is 0 gravity as well. But we've made it twice as long. And once again, it's still in 3-dimensional space, so it's just going to get turbulenced. Ooh, that looks cool. Yeah, the way they cascade through each other is really neat. I really love building structures through connections because you can't make this type of thing any other way. Like we could have faked some of this by just making a dynamic spline, but they wouldn't bend properly. You wouldn't be able to constrict its bending. You could, eyeball it, but it would never work accurately. This is just going to work. The way we set it up, the colors aren't, we can't easily control the colors in some sort of spectrum, but there's probably ways of doing it that wouldn't be too hard. Actually, well, I'm trying to think of how I would do that. Is there a clever way? Is there a clever way of colorizing these the way we want to? Let's do an experiment. We've got all of these. I'm going to select every single cylinder. I guess it'll still render properly. It'll lag a frame behind though. With every single cylinder selected, I'm going to create a tracer object, which is going to automatically put the cylinders inside of the tracer. I don't want to trace paths. I want to connect all elements, but not the vertices. So the hope here is if I hide this, we should have a straight spline. Yeah. And that straight spline is going to lag a frame behind, but it's going to essentially trace the midpoint of all of them. So we can see that that is the halfway point. Wait, where was I going to go with this? I was going to use a color vertex tag, but I suddenly realized that probably doesn't make sense. No, there still might be ways of doing it. But these all need to be in some sort of... they still need to be put in some sort of cloner or fracture for that to work. Yeah. Yeah, I suddenly don't have a good way of doing it. I mean, I like, you know, you can do these connections in between, and that's neat. And then even that, I wonder if we could. Well, the tracer, this is going to bend in the way that like a tube would, or sort of like a Slinky would. So if we actually keep that in mind, could we make sort of a duct, you know, like the tubes behind a dryer? Could we do that? So here's the thoughts. How many do we have? We have 128 of them right now. So what if essentially we're not even going to view that? That's just going to create the dynamics for us. And then if we create, I suppose I'll make an end side, and we'll keep it pretty low poly so we can see it quickly. 16. That's a nice halfway. Now clone onto an object. The object is the trader. So now we get a series of those. I can make exactly a count of them. We have to be careful about it looping. So if you turn off loop, then it's going to be per. Now if I set it to 128, it's possible we need one more or one less, but this should be visually identical to what we had, and these will not intersect each other, but we have complete control over them, and they're generated via a clone. So first of all, if we did want to control their color, I'll just do it here, because what I'm about to do is going to make it irrelevant to do that. But we could turn that on and say, I want this based on the field color. Oh, but there's no field. Let me say I want it based on the vector color. There. Now we can colorize them. So just to throw that out there. Okay. So first of all, let's see if this works in a loft. I don't know that it will. I don't know if it will. Loft, put that in. Does it interconnect them all? Seemingly, yes. So now what the thought is what if I put a second end side in it? So it's alternating between these two. Tell the cloner to create twice as many clones, and then have every other one be smaller. Yeah, look at that. So now every other one is being smaller than it. We don't need it to create all these in-between subdivisions. I'll turn that off. So now we see we got this type of geometry. And if I hit play, yeah, hopefully we can see that these will pinch in, but they can only pinch in so far. Oh, look at that. That's cool. And look how fast this is running. So now we've got this tube type shape. Let's exaggerate it even a little bit more. So yeah, these can stretch and bend in between themselves, but they won't overlap and overshoot. So they have this automatic limitation built in. That is awesome. Look at that. That's cool. It's actually running really fast. So I think we could increase our sides up to 24. And it's not super smooth, but we could subdivide it. And currently the Phong tags are probably activating, deactivating, activating, deactivating. Yeah, the Phong is the messy thing. So I could just say, okay, everything has Phong or nothing has Phong. Turn off caps, get rid of those end caps, and now these will bend. And now we've got this really awesome snaky, wormy tube that should be kind of dynamically accurate. We could make it do whatever we want it to. The ability to, we could pull this and run, it's already dynamic, but we could make a fixed connector and force it to follow something or be connected to something. In fact, if we go back, it should be as simple as, this might be silly, but if I just go back to the bottom one, remember we always turn the bottom one off, but if I just turn that on, it is now connected to nothing, which means that one is stuck. It can't move, but everything else can. So watch, that one's going to stay in the same place, but these will not. And now this bottom one is a ball and socket connection. I could go back and make that a fixed connection, which means that bottom one can't rotate. So everything above it's going to try and bend, but the bottom one can't. So everything else will move and bend. And currently there's no gravity. It's just turbulence. So these are just randomly moving around. But that bottom one's never going to move. So yeah, look at this pretty robust rig. I never thought about it in terms of discs. I always built this kind of thing out of cubes or spheres. So this does open up the opportunity for this type of tube. I love these little pinches in there. That's the cool part. Let's see. I'm trying to think of anything I want to do with it. I mean, keep in mind, like we're doing this loft version of it, so we have a lot of control over how many copies there are, and we could make it like more visually, mechanically sound. I would think maybe the offsets wouldn't look right, but I think if we put like 2 of one type and then 1 of the other, and then double the count again, at a certain point we'll start slowing down. But now, now you see that we get 2 in, 2 out, 2 in, 2 out, and they could start looking very, very mechanically sound. Like it might look less organic. Yeah, you see how they're going to bend. Oh, look at those beautiful pinches. Like it's working perfectly. Those can catch up to each other, but not in the end. They can't pass through. The Fong tag is still potentially acceptable. It just has to be at the right threshold. Still running reasonably well. Because I guess these are just clones, so the actual dynamics run on something pretty... don't use edge breaks. I'm having a little bit of trouble with the Fong tag, but this might just be the shadows generating. I'm not sure. But yeah, now it looks a little bit more mechanical. I'm trying to think. I mean, you can make more than 1 tube easily. We could potentially we could easily grab the tip here and be dragging around, making it do whatever we want. This would interact just fine with things like spheres. Like we could make dynamic spheres and crash them into it, or have them be attracted to each other. And I always love the idea of having these two. We have 2 rigs right now. We have a dynamic series of cylinders, and then completely unrelated, we now have this sweep. But I'll save this as another version because it's working quite well. It's even refreshing properly. Impressive. So we're doing this, but just to, I guess we have a lot of the work we need in here. But if I turn off the other hierarchy, as I was saying, like let's say we want to color, we have all those cylinders and we want to colorize them or have a little bit more control over them. I could, if we're making a little bit more, what's a good way? I don't want to just make I'll make them thicker. We want to have the same outer radius, and we'll give it an inner radius of, let's say, 180. A height of 10. So now we get this ring. I guess I want it to be a little smaller, like that. And we'll spin it around, what's our, there, 24, 36. Yeah, 36 will be pretty smooth around. So that goes into the cloner. Clone 128 of them, exactly. The orientation is not correct, so we'll put that on Z+. So now we get that. So we have this, and as we kind of alluded to earlier, we get the structure. It's going to clone really quickly, and then I think we'd probably even be able to make this a multi-instance, so they're going to run really fast, so we can get this type of more complicated structure going. And we are having all the trouble thinking of like, how do we colorize them? Well, it's like, no, those are just dynamics. We're done with those. Now we just control everything via this. So as simple as creating a step effector, or yeah, let's make a plane effector. Always use plane effectors. Make a plane effector, color it with the field colors, which it already is, which means inside of fall off, we can feed anything we like. In this case, I could say a step effector, and the step effector should affect the color. And now it's going to take each step of the way traveling all along it, which means inside of its color remap, we set that to gradient and feed in whatever gradient we want to. So let's make a rainbow one. Look at that. Oh, it's so cool. So those we can colorize those in such a quick, trivial way. I'm just trying to think of other cool things to do here. I mean, if we are actually making a Slinky, I don't think I'd want to build it this way because Slinkies can bend more than this can. So I wouldn't build a Slinky this way. Plus, Slinkies can get longer. This actually is never getting longer or shorter. It's a set length. Here's I think the dynamics will run quick enough. This will definitely slow it down a little bit, but just as a cool thing. And this is very appropriate for this month. what was I going to do? Oh, if we make a simulate force, a simulate dynamic force. This is a attractor. It's like we can make it self-repulse or self-attract. So I think, yeah, by default, I think they attract. So if we make the strength strong enough, I think we can make this like curl up like a worm. The radius is not huge. I'm going to increase that significantly. If we get the, whoa, okay, well, let's give it a little bit of time. But yeah, okay, so this is totally working. You see, because I made these, they're all attracted to each other, but the radius is large enough that it's going to make them all coil up, and they just kind of happen to coil up. So that's neat. Based on their shape, I wasn't really thinking about this, but they can intersect each other. I mean, this is kind of realistic. This is the way they would intersect, but they do have the ability to do that. And of course, you have the ability to do the opposite. I can say negative 22, and now it's repulsing itself. It can never get that close to itself. You gotta go with a light touch with this type of thing, because every single one of these is trying to get away from every other one. But in general, this is going to probably start to slowly straighten it out, but it is also fighting with the turbulence. So yeah, this in general would eventually straighten out. But enough turbulence, I'll start increasing the power of our turbulence. And at a certain point, it'll be strong enough to overcome. Yeah, now it's strong enough to overcome it trying to straighten out all the way. So yeah, it's just two opposing forces, and you just got to find the correct balance of them. Turn that off, and the turbulence is going to be crazy. And we could do a positive force, but make it pretty light. So it is self-attracted, just not too much. Well, apparently a little goes a long way. No wonder we were having to crank that up so high. Yeah, not a perfect spiral this time, but it will kind of bunch up like a snake in space. Wow, yeah. Strength of 1 is more powerful than I thought it would be. So we could probably set that down like 0.1 or something. Yeah, let's see. We're already 20 minutes over. I'll see if there's any short questions or not cinema questions, but this is pretty cool. Whee. Blur. Actually, it'd be good to maybe look up the bottom one, because the bottom one's fixed. So well, that already looks cool. There, that should be the thumbnail for this. I'm gonna save this as thumbnail, because this will be the background thumbnail. Thumbnail. Yeah, looking up the tube. This will probably very quickly break, but for a few frames there, it looks pretty cool. If we told it to be straighter, it could hold on to it. But yeah, any questions? Pro Tools, I am not going to speak to that. We'll make an announcement soon about that. Yeah, like a snake in space. You haven't seen a snake in space? I made a comic about it once. Let's see. Yeah, that seems all good. Yeah, Robbie, the robot arms. It makes for good robot arms. Super dynamic. I just love making those things. And then we put all that work into it. But you saw how I really love this espresso setup. Like, it's so basic, and it's well, it's currently broken, but we could easily fix it. And it's just like, okay, boom, everything gets fixed. And it was really easy. Like, you make it more dynamic, so it actually will dynamically look through all the children. Like, you can only make one tag, go and check, and do all of them in one go. But it's a more complicated setup, and the ability to copy and paste that onto all of the child tags, and it just fixes everything. Such a great little bonus. Yeah, and we could make it into a Slinky. Like, you could just, I guess, okay, that's a good scale thing. It's not going to be a good Slinky, but are you a good Slinky or a bad Slinky? If we turn off the cloner, let's just rewind all the way. It's just not good. It's not going to be a good Slinky because it's not going to be very stretchy. It can't go very far, but this, I mean, we can make this a Slinky as trivial by making, let's lay it full. No, actually, we want to lay on X and Y, and even the height doesn't really matter. So if we make a spline wrap, put that in the helix, it's currently traveling, tell the spline wrap to travel along Z plus, that will travel along the tracer. Then now we get a spiral traveling wherever the tracer is. And then we just have to make, I don't know, 10 times as many spirals. And it's going to have nowhere near enough points, so I'll make more points. 10 times many spirals again. Actually, I guess we can say, if we're being, I don't know if it's accurate, but let's say 360 times 128, which is how many rings we have. And yeah, that seems like a fine set of fine spiral. And then I guess the slightly tricky part is the sweeping of it. Like the angle's going to be weird. There's actually a way around that I can think of. Create a sweep. And that will sweep that. Nope. That will sweep that. T for scale. Now, here you see the angle thing I was talking about, how it's twisted in all these weird angles, which isn't quite right. But what's cool is the fix is really easy. We can just create a second helix. And so it's one helix, and this will become the rail. If we just shrink the radius, then it should make a rail one, and now it has a perfect orientation. Make sure that our rectangle is the correct direction. Oh, and it's taking on the rail scale, so turn off rail scale. Scale this up to whatever size you want. Technically, where's the thick? There we go. Okay, it's hard to get the right combination, but there we go. Now we get this. So now we got this coil going, and the thickness will be by increasing one or the other. The slight trick is you see it's actually getting thicker from the center point out and in. Actually, now that I think about it, that should be fine. We just need to, let me look at the original. Let's make that invisible. So we don't want it to be any bigger than that, but all we have to do is take the outer helix, the big one, and shrink its radius. Oop, I guess we want the top. Shrink the inner, that radius down until that matches. I thought we were going to have to do something fancy with the rectangle, like making it edible and whatnot, but yeah, don't even have to do that. Now we can hide that again. So now we've got a one giant long sweep that we can control the thickness, do whatever we want. I did like that rainbow gradient. And now that we've changed the structure of this, that's as simple as going into the luminance channel, creating a gradient there, twirling down, load preset, grab our rainbow again, apply that to the sweep, and change this to be a 2D V. And now that's going to spiral around, and go all the way up to the top. Hopefully there could be some sort of order operations that I'm not thinking of, but let's see if that just works. CD. Hit play. Seems to just work. Now, essentially, we have a Slinky, but it's a Slinky that's never going to stretch too much. But it is a spiral. This is a spiral that's going to spiral all the way up and down that spline. So it's a continuous spiral. So, it's cool along those lines. But a Slinky would be stretchable, and nothing we did made this so it could stretch. Making a proper Slinky would be a different challenge, but this just made me think of things differently anyway. So I might approach a Slinky very differently with what we just did. I don't know. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Oh yeah, somebody was saying put a helix on it, but yeah, it did work. I mean, this Slinky is just not a stretchy Slinky. Thanks, Pro Tools. Let's see. Yeah, somebody said they're late. Yeah, this will be available on the channel, the official restream or the replay channel, the archive channel. Actually, let me pull that up because I think it's important. I will put the link in as well. Everyone should subscribe to. Let's search for. Oh, look. Rocket Lasso is live. Let's go to Rocket Lasso Live. And there's Rocket Lasso, but there's another channel now here, which is Rocket Lasso Live. And this is one that everyone should also subscribe to because this is where I'm posting the replays. So you get all of the previous episodes. So there's more than 40 episodes. Everybody, if you're not already subscribed, go there right now, hit the subscribe button. And I post the episodes usually on Friday. So the replay will be there along with notes and time codes and links. Once again, if you are, and I forgot to mention, but if we go to regular Rocket Lasso, we just crossed 10,000 subscribers, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so thank you everybody for supporting and following along those lines. It's worth mentioning that if you are supporting on Patreon, you get all those scene files as well as access to the tutorials. You actually get access to the tutorial a week early officially, but you can also, I live stream the recording of the tutorial. So you actually can get the tutorial 2 weeks in advance with that in mind. And you get the scene file, so it's pretty cool. So if anybody is interested, if anything I show you here is useful and maybe it works for a client, you make something really cool from it. If you want to support, then Patreon is the current best way to do it. Eventually, we'll have some tools out there, and the best way to support will be to buy the tool, and then you also get something extra useful for yourself. But for now, that is the best method. So that should wrap up today's episode. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. There were some fun ones in there for sure. Make sure you check out the new tutorial, subscribe to both of the channels, and I'll see you in a week. Bye-bye, everybody. Toodaloo.